Hello, my name is Dano.
My name is Wheezy.
And thank you for tuning in to our inaugural
FPL across the pond.
All right, let's do it. Thank you for tuning in to the inaugural FPL Across the Pond podcast, where we will be discussing everything FPL, from the very best fantasy picks in the game to the latest news, transfers, differentials, fixtures, injuries, and more from across the pond. Without further delay, to get started for the 2024-2025 fantasy season, we have some new rules that we need to go over. The first and foremost being the 5 new free transfer rule. So this is a rule that I think is going to be very beneficial to a lot of managers going forward in FPL. So what the rule basically is before, if you're not familiar with Fantasy Premier League, before you used to be able to have 2 free transfers, and not only are you able to bank 5 new free transfers, but also you're going to be able to save your transfers and not have them reset once you go ahead and play one of those wild card or those free hit chips. So that is hugely beneficial for a lot of FPL managers like myself, who would normally go ahead, and I'm big on banking the free transfers. I always try to plan 4 or 5 weeks out. Of course, that usually doesn't always play, with injuries, things like that. But I think this new rule is going to, allows a lot of managers to take less hits, especially later on in the season. I think that the free chips going forward without having to reset them is going to be crucial, again, especially in the second part of the season when most people are playing a lot of those chips. I mean, obviously we get those in the first half too. Huge rollover play there, especially at the beginning of the season. You have to make sure that you're planning for the first, I would say, at least 4, 5, 6 weeks ahead of time. I mean, that's the advantage of the beginning of the season, right?
Yeah, well, it's basically like a mini wild card, right? If you can bank 5 transfers, there's 38 weeks in FPL, right? And if you can make 5 moves in the same week, like, you can really capitalize on double game weeks. I know that they've said that with the FA Cup changes, there's not going to be as many double game weeks as we had seen in the past with COVID and everything else that kind of jumbled up the schedule. But yeah, I think it's definitely introducing a new strategy that everybody should consider when making moves this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of different strategies you can go into play with that, and we'll get into all of that later on here. Probably have some other segments on that as well. Let's see here. And just so you are aware, I'm not sure a lot of people know this, especially new managers, that you could always, carry over your chips, your transfers that you've banked when you use in previous seasons. That is, when you do use the bench boost and the triple captain. So that's always still in play, but now it's particularly with the free hit and the wild card.
Yeah, anytime you're changing your whole roster or whatever, where you're making moves, the transfers would reset. But now they're not going to reset, so it's definitely something to consider. And so another new rule is the mystery chip.
Big one.
There's a lot of talk about what it could be, what it might be, and all that, but it's definitely intriguing. I think they said they're going to let us know in January what it is.
Yep, so January 2020.
There's a lot of speculation that it could be something to do with the winter transfer window. Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird to play a game where you don't know all the rules going into it, but I think it should freshen things up a little bit and even things out towards the second half of the year here.
Yeah. I thought it was odd that they were introducing it in January with the time frame too. Is it because they don't necessarily have it down yet and know exactly to do it? Or is it just because the majority of managers or seasoned managers will play their chips in the second half of the season? So
who knows? Yeah, it's like a future me problem, right? So it's like, we'll get you an extra chip this year, but we're going to need an extension to January to figure out what exactly to get out of you. But, it was just looking through just other people's theories of what it could be. And so we can kind of run through these. I like this idea of a limitless chip, like a free hit, but no budget. So basically somebody's been, online posters have thought potentially that maybe you just get no budget for a week. I don't know if then your roster would return back to what it was the previous week, like a free hit. I would imagine you couldn't just have no budget for the rest of the year.
No, definitely not.
So it's probably a 1 week thing. Another idea would be either home field or away day chip. So where you would get double the points for all your away players or double your points for all your home players. That's not. I hope that's not it.
Yeah, I'm not.
That would be pretty disappointing. And then others are like all defenders and keepers score 2 times points, or all your attackers score 2 times points. So I don't know. It's definitely intriguing. I can't imagine they're going to do this every year, but it's something to consider going forward.
Let's see here. We do have another big thing, which we're probably going to get into later on and make a whole new episode about, or its own episode, I should say, is the bonus point system, because there are several different bonus points. There's a lot of bonus points that have changed this year, which is going to be vital to strategy with FPL managers. One, for example, we got goalkeepers and defenders. Conceding a goal will be worth -4 bonus points. We have a goal line clearance, which will be worth 3 bonus points. A foul 1 will be worth 1 bonus point. And a shot on target will be worth 2 bonus points. And we'll go in more depth in comparing exactly like what the differences in the bonus points is for last year, especially for the new managers that are going to be and joining FPL this year.
Yeah, understanding those bonus points is really a way to get to the next level of FPL, right? Like, I'm not even quite there yet. You think, how many goals can you score for your players, right? Those are the big points. And
right.
But what you notice over the course of the season is it pays off when you can get those 3 to 1 extra bonus point per match there. And it's something I want to dive deeper into and maybe see if we can find some sort of competitive advantage with the bonus point system. And especially when it changes, everybody's got to go back to the drawing board and figure out what it really means. A couple other changes that I saw was goalkeepers scoring is up from 6 to 10. But what that happens, once every 5 seasons maybe. So that's not really much of a change. The bigger goalkeeper-related scoring change would be that penalties were reduced from 15 to 9.
That's huge. Yeah, that's big.
And so, like Emmy Martinez or whoever who's known as a penalty stopper, like, you could get 2 to 3 penalty saves per season, and that's reducing it by 18 points there.
Significant.
And so
that adds up.
So it's definitely something that I want to look into further, and we'll definitely cover that on a future episode here.
One of the other major changes this year to the 2024-2025 FPL season is the changes to blank and double game weeks. Those are going to be fewer and far between. So that is something to consider. And I'm not sure if that really is kind of coincides with the new rule with the 5 transfer rule too. If that's going to play in somehow later on in this season, we'll have to kind of dive more, deeper into that as well. But so basically what the rule is, in particular for domestic cup, obviously competitions, and the FA Cup in itself will have fewer clashes resulting with the EPL schedule. This is meant to have fewer and smaller blank and double game weeks. So that's something to plan for ahead. And who knows if that new mystery chip's going to play into that as well. Kind of that sort of thing. So, but in any case, the changes to the FA Cup in particular as well is that the FA Cup quarterfinals will now take place on the weekend in late March, when they aren't in any Premier League matches taking place there. Postponements that are usually caused by the FA Cup quarterfinals results in the biggest blank week of the campaign. Usually it will be reduced. Not saying there aren't going to be any double game weeks or any blanks, don't get me wrong. There's always different schedule conflicts. I mean, just for example, weather can come into play. So you got to take all that into account. But with that, there are going to be reschedules. But in all intents and purposes, the double game weeks and the blanks will be reduced this year.
Yeah, there's no Luton Town stadium issues to make a double game week this year.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, you never know. The Queen could die. Stuff like that happens.
The King.
Well, the Queen did die a few years ago. They had to put a few game weeks back and all that, and all of a sudden we're getting double game weeks. But yeah, like you just never know with them. Like you said, weather, all sorts of weird stuff happens to push back fixtures and all that, and so you never know when the double game week will happen. So when it happens, make sure to jump all over it this year because, like Dano said, it's allegedly going to be fewer and far between.
Yeah. I mean, it should be. I mean, just in general with those, especially towards the later end of the FA Cup and such, domestic cups. All right. Let's see here. All right. Should we dive into player price adjustments?
Yeah, I have a couple notable price adjustments. We start with Holland, the star of FPL.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's a record 15 million.
Record FPL 15 million this year, guys, which is changing a lot of strategies and a lot of different drafts that I've seen, especially thus far.
So yeah, and it becomes a question, you know, do you have Holland on the team or not? That's the number one question in FPL this season, Holland or no?
Right.
And, you know, we can cover that when we reveal our initial lineups for the year. Don't hold us to it.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're still, 3 weeks away from the opening match of the season.
Yeah, it's definitely a preface. Yeah, we got a lot to go.
Yeah, a couple other notable price changes on players that I think both of us had on our teams last year would be John Philip Mateta.
Mm-hmm.
He's up £2.5 million to £7.5 million on the year. And so that's another thing, like, you know, he was great at £5 million. What is he going to be at 7.5? You know, do you believe that Crystal Palace is going to continue their form from the end of last year?
I think so. There's a lot to be determined in the preseason, basically, you know.
That's the hard thing about EPL, right, is there's still dozens, if not hundreds of transfers that are going to happen all across the EPL.
Yeah, what were we talking about? We got like at least 60% of the transfers still yet to take place or something. At least some outrageous number.
At least, and I don't know a number off the top of my head. But yeah, Crystal Palace, that's an interesting team. They finished the season so strong last year. We're putting 4 goals past a lot of big teams. So I think they had 3 or 4 different players that made the England Euro squad, which was more than Manchester United even. So yeah, so that's one to watch on Crystal Palace. Another one, Anthony Gordon, who I got a lot of points out of last year. He's up to £7.5 million. Yeah, at 5.5, he was a bargain, and so 7.5 is definitely a lot fairer price for him. And then the other one I noted was my guy Rodrigo Muniz, who's up to $6 million. He was a steal at 4.5 million.
Yeah, that was great. That was a jump.
And so I don't know. I think he's going to have a big season. Fulham don't have a lot of quality in the backup striker role at this point, so I don't see anybody really pushing him for his place in the team. So
yeah, I agree. I think he's going to have a starting spot and going forward. And I mean, he played well. He started dwindling off a little bit in the end of the season, but like when he first came on in that second half of the season, he was murdering. He was killing.
Yeah, it's tough to keep up that pace, but I believe he was the first double-digit goal scorer for Fulham in the Premier League in a long time. So, yeah,
with Mitrovic.
Yeah, I don't think Mitrovic really. You know, there's always doubts about whether he could perform in the Premier League, and yeah, Scott Parker pretty much ruined his career. But, yeah, and so I don't know. Those were the 3 that I highlighted as far as price changes for the next year.
Yeah, one of the major other price adjustments I really wanted to highlight was Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer.
Oh, yeah.
He scaled, and I'm actually trying to see exactly
Yeah, that was actually
what it was last year.
Yeah, he was $5 million to start.
To start, yeah.
And so I actually pulled up a stat that he was the highest price rise from season to season in the history of FPL. So he went from 5 million to 10.5 million from season to season, and clearly
That's incredible.
Like you had to have Palmer in your squad last year, or else you weren't stiff in the top.
Honestly, I mean, what did he have last year? I mean, he
led the league in points.
just ridiculous. He had 22 goals and 13 assists last year. Just absolutely murdered. I mean, up there right with Ollie Watkins, Holland, yeah, I mean, I would be hard pressed not to. Anybody who doesn't have him on their team, is probably, if they don't have him on their team already, at least they're thinking about it. Very much so, contemplating it. Even with that huge price jump, I mean, it's just, he's a player that just produces. He had a great Euro showing. So, I mean, when he did get in, you know what I mean?
That's Southgate for you. But,
Yeah, right.
yeah, there's 244 points I'm showing that he had last year, the highest score in all of fantasy. So, at £5 million, I don't know what he ended up the season at. He's in the sixes or whatever. But, yeah, that was a lot different this year with 10.5 million rating to start the season.
All right, so how about we get into, we'll just get into some player formation. There are seven different formations you can play, one being a 3-4-3, which can be pretty, that's usually a pretty popular formation, I would say, 3-4-3. You have a 4-4-2 you could play, which is heavily, obviously, more defensive focused, but if you do have some attacking defenders that can move into that, move into those roles that are playing the more wingers, especially the way the formations are in the EPL, not in Fantasy Premier League, so we're limited there. But yeah, that would be decent if you're defensive focused. This is the formation I usually tend to pick, and especially because of the midfielders. What a lot of people that I found in my years in fantasy is, you might not have strong players in certain positions depending on the year. 2 years ago, or I think 2 or 3 years ago, what was it? The forwards were horrible, absolutely horrible. So I was playing a 5-4 or 5-4-1 or whatever. You know what I mean? Just whatever you could do to reduce the forward, because it was not going well. But this past year, and I think this year as well, will be heavily intensive focus on midfielders again. So my main formation that I'm going to be going for most of the time, I would think, would be a 3-5-2. You also have a 5-4-1. Again, if you want to play heavy defense, maybe you're hard up against it that week. You know what I mean? You're playing, you have some good defenders, but not a whole lot of offensive potential, injuries, whatever might come into play. And then the last position, 4-3-3, which is also defensive heavy, but highlights the three forwards. That could be beneficial. Moving into a more offensive-minded, especially if you have some great forwards on your team.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's really matchup dependent, right? Based on the game week, what sort of matchups you have. And that's, as a newer player over the last few years, that was one thing that I didn't weigh heavily enough, right? Is who do they have coming up on the fixture list? What are the matchups? And, there's always the three newly promoted teams, right?
Yeah.
That you want to try to capitalize on. Yeah. Who do we got this year? We got Ipswich, Southampton, and Leicester.
Yep.
And so, Leicester bounced back after a year in the championship.
Same with Southampton.
Southampton too. Ipswich hasn't been around for 20 plus years.
Ages.
Yeah, and so
Ages, yeah.
I think it's going to be pretty popular to go against Ipswich this year, and they're going to let up a lot of goals, I would imagine. It's always a huge jump from the championship to the Premier League, and and that's just one thing. When I was drafting my teams in the past, I would kind of focus on who I thought was going to be a good player throughout the season, and I think it's important to consider the first 5-6 weeks of matchups, and who has easy matchups to start the year. I kind of went through and highlighted a few teams that I think have easy matchups to start the year.
Mhm.
And so the first team that I wanted to focus on was Chelsea. I think Chelsea has a great fixture list to start the season, with the exception of playing Man City in the first game.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
And
but-
so I know Dano had talked about wanting to bank all 5 get up to 5 transfers.
And let's be clear, that's the goal.
That is the goal.
Right?
And, I was
More than likely
considering-
won't happen for a lot of people, right?
And
Yeah.
with Chelsea's fixtures being so enticing, so basically they play Man City, then away at Wolves, home at Crystal Palace, away at Southampton, away at West Ham, home at Brighton, and then home against Nottingham Forest. So those are all against bottom 10 teams in the Premier League traditionally, and so you would like to think that would be great news for Cole Palmer. So
yeah.
I think he's a must to get into your team, especially since he takes the penalties and all that. So
Yeah, that's huge.
I'm focusing on Cole Palmer from Chelsea. Any other players that you think from Chelsea that stand out to you for this year?
Yeah, definitely. And in my initial draft here, I have Nkunku as well in mine. I know a lot of people are hesitant about him. I understand. But, coming off of the injuries last year, he's coming back really strong. The data that he had, coming back in for coming off of the injury is incredible. He's playing, he's Maresca's, number one from what I can see in terms of, Maresca's been singing his praises left and right. So he's been getting the starts, or at least the one Wrexham game that he got to start, and he even got a goal in the Wrexham game. It's Wrexham, don't get me wrong,
Wrexham.
but yeah.
He's an incredible player, though. I remember watching him at Red Bull
in the Bundesliga,
and he had some incredible goals. He's got unbelievable speed, and he should be a great player. I had him in my team last year. That didn't work out too well, as he got hurt right away. But yeah, I'm thinking big things for him. A lot of people are saying at the expense of Nicholas Jackson. So I don't know. I think they can both play and together, but we'll see. The one thing about Chelsea that I'm not sure about is their defense. Who's going to be their starting back four? They lost Silva, right?
Yeah.
They have 6 central defenders that are all about the same quality, and then you never know.
And then you have players coming from last year that were injured that didn't get much playing time, like Fofana. You know what I mean?
That's what I'm saying.
There's a lot to be seen that's coming forward here.
on the left back, is it Chilwell? Is it Cucurella? I don't know, and so that's kind of
that's where preseason comes in.
You gotta pay attention to who's getting those starts in the preseason and adjust accordingly, huh?
Yep. Absolutely.
So then other easy schedules that I highlighted. Let's see. I believe Man City has a pretty easy one, and Newcastle as well. So out of the top 6 clubs, I think they all have pretty great fixture lists to start the season. So I've been trying to target, trying to get 3 players from each squad if I can. And then some of the teams outside of the big 6 that I think have decent fixture lists would be Crystal Palace and Nottingham Forest. And so it's always good to supplement your team with some of these players not on the big 6, because that's where you can make up some differential, right?
Yeah.
Nottingham Forest starts with Bournemouth, Southampton, Wolves, and then they get into Liverpool, Brighton, and then Fulham. And so I think that's a pretty good start for a lower club for sure. And then Crystal Palace starts with Brentford, West Ham, Chelsea away, and then Leicester City. And so those are a decent 4-week stretch to start the season. And
Yeah, definitely, especially with West Ham's defense. They've been playing. They had a horrible season. They're looking to revamp that this year as well. But those first couple of games should be pretty good. And again, you can always adjust from there. You know what I mean? Just because we're saying as well that we're planning for 5 or 6 weeks out. Again, things are going to happen, and you're going to have to go ahead and make adjustments for sure, one way or another.
Yeah, and you get those opportunities to make those wholesale changes with your wild card, right? Twice a year. So
Yep.
That's one thing that's if you're not really aware of it, right? It's a chip that you can pretty much swap out your whole team, and then that will stick. The free hit will just be for 1 week only, where it does it. And so basically, you have 3 opportunities where you can make wholesale changes to your squad, and so just because you're not starting with Holland in the beginning of the year or whoever doesn't mean you can't have them for the majority of the year. It's just you really want to look at those game week 1 fixtures and then try to pinpoint what the best squad is for then, and then potentially try to save your transfers to get up to 5 or how many ever.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important not to look too long term when it comes to the season.
Let's go ahead and get into our initial drafts. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, we'll start with goalkeepers, right?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of getting the cheapest backup goalkeeper as possible, right? And so the cheapest goalkeepers are at £4 million. Try to save some money there. There's 4 5.5 million pound keepers. There's Raya, Becker, Ederson, and then Ederson's backup Ortega.
5.5.
That's a
4.5.
5.5. And so yeah, none of them really stand out to me for this year. With Ederson's threat to go to Saudi Arabia, I would stay away from the Man City keepers until the transfer window shuts. You can always bring them into your team later. So with that said, I'm going to go with Nick Pope to start for me.
Okay.
He's at £5 million, and then like I said, for my backup, got to go with the American Matty Turner, even though he's not gonna sniff the playing field for us after all his gaffes last year. But you got to have at least one American in your squad. So
Agreed.
I'm going with those 2 to start the year. How about you?
Nice one. Yeah, so I'm going with, I actually had 2 keepers, one of them being Emerson. And again, I know that's controversial given, the recent turn of events. Might be going to Saudi Arabia to play in the Pro League with Al Ittihad is the new front runner for him. But yeah, to be determined. If Emerson's not up, I'm leaning more towards Rhea, bringing in Rhea, just because Arsenal's defense solid, there should be, even though the schedule isn't the greatest at first, I think he should be putting up some points with that defense they have. And he's quality as well. Great player. All right. And also the other player that I have for goalkeeper is going to be Sanchez from Chelsea, another Chelsea boy.
What is he at?
Sanchez is at 4.5. 4.5. So he is budget. Not high on a lot of people's list, but he has been, he's just coming off the injury from last year. He wasn't getting the playing time over Petrovic. He was the number 1 at the end of the season last year, but he has been playing, and Maresca has declared him as the number 1, or at least at the beginning here in the preseason. We'll see how that goes.
Did he start against Wrexham?
He did start it against Wrexham. Yep, played against Wrexham, started. And they did get 2 goals on them, don't get me wrong. So we'll see how that defense shapes up. But but he's starting right now. He's number 1. I'm going to go with him. And especially given their schedule. Outside of that week 1 schedule, that's fine. But, if need be, I could just throw in... if Ederson doesn't work out, obviously, for game week 1, I'm definitely going to throw in probably more than likely Rhea. Yeah. So cover against the Wolves fixture.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the defenders. So I'd like to get as many fullbacks as possible, obviously, for the potential for assists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of weird that we're going goalkeepers or defenders, because it's really like the forwards where all your budget gets blown, right?
Yeah,
and,
that was
right?
where I was having the hardest time, finding.
And so you want to have some budget defenders out there, because you run out of money, especially if you have Holland in your team, or some of these other Mo Salah, whoever that's the expensive players. So I decided to go this year with Trent Alexander-Arnold, the most expensive defender. There's, who knows if he's going to be playing in the midfield again with Arne Slot, or if he's going to be back at right back. But, he's listed as a defender. I'm expecting big things out of him this year. And then I also got Guardiola. How do you say that?
Gavardio.
You sure? And so obviously it might be a little bit of recency bias because he had all those goals towards the end of the season last year.
Yeah.
And he's just a great player. So
It's quality.
$100 million defender. So you got to have him in the squad. And then I had to fill out the rest of my defenders with some $4.5 million or 4.5 million pound players and a 5 million pound player. Maatsen from Aston Villa, I think is a should be a good player this year. He came off a successful loan with Dortmund last year, where they made it to the Champions League final.
Yeah,
he was
he had
getting
a great
starts,
season.
and so I'm liking that. Hopefully, he can keep that going for Aston Villa here. And then the old reliable Dan Burn and Konsa from Villa. So a couple $4.5 million players. Hopefully, they can get some clean sheets. And, I'd mentioned Newcastle having some easy fixtures to start the season. So hopefully Dan Burn will get those starts. And you just never know with over a month left in the transfer window, like who a big club like Newcastle might bring in. But for whatever reason, Dan Burn, he can't run it all, but he still gets the starts.
Yeah, he does. He's consistent. And speaking of Dan Burn, I also have Dan Burn on my team as well as the budget midfielder there. So definitely, I think I've seen a lot of drafts with him on there, just in terms of budget players that they need to fulfill some of those roles. But yeah, same with me. I focus with all my players, try to focus on, players that will, not only getting those attacking returns and making those runs, especially on those back wing positions. So to start off, I do have Saliba, which isn't necessarily one of those players, and the schedule for the Arsenal isn't that great going at the beginning of the season. But that being said, you have a couple good fixtures at the beginning there. Number one being Wolves in the first game. But he's just solid. He's going to play. He played well for France in the Euros. So he's just consistent. He's been consistently playing. I don't see any question marks there with Saliba in his game playing time. Again, not the biggest attacking threat, but that's why I brought in some of my other players here that I have. I also have Robinson, which, for Fulham, I don't intend on, starting him initially, and I don't think I'm going to start him in the first game there against United, being against United there. And they're playing away, so probably not the best bet there. Yeah, just want a little Americano on the team, right?
You gotta get one.
Yeah, you gotta get at least one on the team there. But yeah, played well in the Copa. And last year he had 6 assists, and he played an astounding 37 out of 38 games. Started, I should say, 37 out of 38 games, and that doesn't look like to be changing too much. And that's a whopping 3,266 minutes, which is absolutely insane.
He was a player of the season for Fulham as a left back. That's not too often you get a player of the season at left back.
Yeah, that's saying a lot. You know what I mean? 37 out of 38 game starts. Like, the man is consistent. He's going to keep playing. So, again, even though I'm not starting him, he's going to get plenty of playing time. You want to get those bench players in that are going to play. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Let's see here. In the back, also, I had Pedro Porro, which might be a little bit more of a controversial pick for some people, given that the schedule isn't too great at the beginning of the season. But I'm a huge fan, and I'm kind of going off the piggybacking off the last season. He's on penalties. He's on, not penalties, I'm sorry, but he's on free kicks and corners, and he's just absolutely, been making inroads on that team, not only as a solid defender, but he gets up the field a lot, and he can definitely get some crosses in, and definitely get some points on the board there. And I also have, my last defender is Gavardio, same as you. He just had an incredible season last year, had a good Euro showing, didn't do as well as, they wanted to, but at the end of the day, he is going to be starting, which is huge in a Pep Guardiola rotation mystery, box there. We never know how Pep is going to rotate, and he does rotate a lot, guys. So if you're new to this,
keep that in mind. So that's the only reason I'm not really bringing on too many other Man City players, just because the rotation is just such. It's with Pep, it's always a rotation. Always rotation risk. So,
I think that's more towards the end of the year if they're still in the Champions League and all that. But Gvardiol is owned by 32% of teams at this point, and as well as Saliba, so is 40%. And so, really, those are two players. They're not going to give you much differential, but if they produce like they did last year, you're going to be left behind if you don't have them on your squad. So
just solid. Arsenal, Man City, those were some of the best defenses in the league last year. So
for sure,
definitely. All right, should we move into midfield?
Yeah, let's move into midfield. This is where we get into some of the big hitters, right? Spoiler alert, I decided to not go with Haaland to start the season. Instead, Mo Salah. I think Mo Salah is going to have a huge start to the season. He starts with Ipswich away.
I agree.
You never know with those newly promoted teams in their opening week. There's been some crazy things that have happened in the past, but
a new Gaffa too.
Yeah, so Mo Salah, he had a chill summer. He wasn't playing with the national team,
right?
Like in the Euros or Copa America or anything like that. So he should be well rested. Klopp's no longer there. He didn't seem to like him towards the end. So I'm thinking big things for him this year. And then Cole Palmer. You got to have Cole Palmer. 10.5 million. And so right there, we're talking 23 million in the midfield on two players. Plus, I got Phil Foden as well. That's 9.5 million on top of that. And so, what are we looking at? 32.5 million.
He was one player. He was one player I couldn't get in my initial draft, but I was trying to.
And I sacrificed Haaland for him. I saved 5.5 million pounds on swapping them out, and I was able to, bring in Palmer and Salah. So I got the big three basically in my midfield there, and then had to add some kind of more budget midfielders. Rodgers with West Ham has had a pretty big preseason so far. Or I'm sorry, with Aston Villa, they opened up with West Ham. He's had a huge preseason so far. He got a lot of starts towards the end of the last year, so I'd probably keep him on the bench to start, but he could be a good budget option like Palmer was last year. And then your former Chelsea boy Hudson Odoi from Nottingham Forest, I got in there. I had mentioned that they have a pretty favorable fixture list to start the season, and so that's where I'm starting out with my midfield. How about you?
Nice one. I like those players too. I think that was a good midfield. Starting out, I'll begin the same way. Salah. I'm bringing Salah in as my highest priced player on my team here in the midfield, particularly though, at 12.5. His end of the season last year was a little bit slow. He was playing with some injuries after the AFCON, and he did come back. But in any case, Salah. You know what you're gonna do with Salah. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't matter. He's still Salah, and he did have an assist versus his first game versus Real Betis as well. So in his preseason game to Soboslai, I think that's how you say it. But
close enough.
Yeah. So he looks to be in form. He looks like he's, making some good strides there and getting back into his former, pre-injury, AFCON injury, I should say. Let's see here. And, of course, Palmer. I also got Palmer. I got Palmer with 22 goals and 13 assists. You cannot go wrong there. He's on penalties. He's on free kicks. He's on corners.
On everything.
He's on everything. You know what I mean? He's stapled on there, and there's a lot of question marks with the new system, under the new management, but I think that he'll make a showing this year again.
Yeah,
I don't think there's too much.
The only thing I can see that could stop him is if Southgate becomes the Chelsea manager.
Yeah, that might be it. Yeah, that would be it. Just holding him back. All right, and then the next player, and again, most of these midfielders, and not only midfielders, midfield and forwards, that I choose or that I look for are on penalties, free kicks, corners. That's just like, it's just an extra aspect of the game that can win you bonus points that is just crucial to, getting ahead in your league, mini league, draft league, whatever it may be. Let's see here. So there's Palmer. Eze, again, another player who's on penalties, free kicks, corners. He had a great, when he got some playing time in the Euros, he did really well. He had a great season last season. The data shows it's going to be just as instrumental. So I do have Eze as my initial draft. There might be some changes to this going forward, but, as of now, I think he's a pretty solid pick. And then we got Gibbs White. Again, he's on penalties, free kicks, corners. He scored 5 goals and 12 assists last season. He is getting on most of the penalties. He kind of has been sharing those a little bit, but for the last few, I believe in the season, he did get on the penalties as the free penalty taker. So I'm just kind of going with the assumption that might still be in play, but we'll see about that here. And my last player, which again is like, it's not a controversial player, but it's just another player that I've seen in a lot of initial drafts, a lot of people either choosing, talking about Nkunku and having him in the conversation, but it's either, a lot of them have been either choosing Palmer or Nkunku. Like, it's either that or. And there's no wrong answer to that. And like, if you decide to go with Palmer at first, it's an easy shift because, Nkunku is well less than the price of Palmer. So you can take that money and budget him. What's that?
What's he at?
And Kuku's budget right now is at 6.5, which is a budget for him, I would say. That's a huge budget. I'm trying to jump on that in the beginning.
All right, let's get into forwards.
Yep.
Big dilemma, right? It's Holland or no Holland. But I'm starting with no Holland. I think the second best forward in the game is Isak from Newcastle. He's just a goal machine. And at 8.5 million pounds, it's 6.5 million less than Holland. So I'm starting with him. And back to my Nottingham Forest easy fixture list. I'm going with Chris Wood, the New Zealander. He'll get a couple headers.
He's been solid, man.
I
like Chris Wood. I'm a fan of Chris Wood.
He can get double-digit goals. That's definitely, and what's the competition for him at Forest? Owoni didn't really play towards the end of last year.
Yeah.
Santos. So I'm liking him to start the season. He definitely won't be on my won't be on my team at the end of the season because I'm really banking on those easy fixtures. And then my guy Rodrigo Muniz for Fulham at $6 million. Raul Jimenez isn't going to take his job, so
no.
He's gonna. I'm thinking big things for him this year. So I'm thinking double-digit goals. If not fit, I'm saying 15 goals this year from Muniz.
Yeah, 15.
15.
Okay, all right. With the full season, it's possible. Yeah,
he
definitely. More than doable.
He was basically the fourth striker
with half a season.
For the whole first half of last season. They got rid of Vinicius, and basically were forced to play him, and he started scoring goals. So let's hope for big things this coming season from him.
Yeah, all of your forwards are just. Those were all like top considerations for me. I even had Isak in my first initial draft that I had. But for forwards for me, I did go a different way just in terms of budget. I do have Ollie Watkins as my most expensive forward at $9 million. It's just a clutch player. You can't go wrong with Ollie. 19 goals and 18 assists last year.
18 assists?
Phenomenal. Just incredible. Look what he did in the Euros when he came on and got that goal in the semi to go on to the finals. Obviously, they didn't take it, but hey, man, he's clutch. He's clutch. You can't deny that. My next forward is going to, and also he's on penalties. So again, another thing to look for. Next forward is João Pedro. Also on penalties, had 9 goals and 3 assists last year. Had a few injury concerns. Didn't do as well as he could have in terms of getting, more playing time in that. So hoping for more minutes this year with them. And I think he's going to be crucial moving forward with that team and carrying them as well, because he was starting to put up some phenomenal numbers there with Brighton. So he's going to be a vital role for Brighton up front next year. And then my last is just kind of a budget forward that was on the Southampton team that got promoted this year with Ross Stewart. Just, again, it was more of a budget forward. I think he's going to get, it comes down to minutes for me. I think he's going to play.
You think so?
I think so. And in any case, I don't plan on starting him much. And I'll be honest, I'll probably consider changing him or possibly transferring him out after a few game weeks there initially. And just depending on how he does, if he's doing well or getting playing time, then that's great. And again, that's another player that's up in the air for me, in terms of just a forward. I was just trying to get the budget in.
How much does he cost?
Ross Stewart is costing 4.5.
So that's basically the minimum.
Yeah,
that you
the
get
minimum for a forward would
forward,
be. Yep,
right.
exactly.
All right. Well, I think we're good. Let's go ahead and wrap this up.
And thank you guys for tuning in to our inaugural podcast about
FPL across the pond.
Want some beer?